In 2003, with the 2005 Saskatchewan Centennial approaching, I had what I considered a great idea. It was based on the 1955 Saskatchewan Jubilee and the CBC television program, The Greatest Canadian. In 1955, the government didn't put on provincial extravaganzas, provide grants, or set requirements for how communities should celebrate. The history represented at a local level during the Jubilee was marked by its grassroots nature and its emphasis on local ownership and involvement. Woodrow Lloyd, who was vice chair of the Provincial Jubilee Committee, explained this approach very well when a proposal by an American company for a traveling professional historical pageant, which were quite popular in the United States at the time, was made to the Provincial Committee. He said, quote, "Local pageants provide the motivation for producing something out of their local community's own resources. Such an effort, although the final production might not be as polished, does seem to be of much more value." In the early 2000s, The Greatest Canadian was asking Canadians to identify the 100 greatest individuals in Canadian history. I thought, why not ask Saskatchewan people during the centennial to identify the province's 100 greatest events and ask communities where these events took place to reenact them? I believed staging these events had the potential to generate grassroots involvement, increase knowledge of history, promote community pride, and generate visitors to communities to help support local economies, all things that were magnificently accomplished during the 1955 Jubilee. Further, I believe that this could be done, as it was in 1955, without government grants and with local resources. I received some polite hearings, but when I explained my idea to the folks I knew in the heritage community or with ties to centennial planning, I mainly got variations on, well, we'll have to wait and see what the government's going to do. So I decided I would have to take matters into my own hands by showing how successful such an event could be. I already knew one event that I was certain deserved to be in the top 100 events in Saskatchewan history. Being from Mossbank, I was well aware that in 1957 there had been a debate there between Tommy Douglas and Ross Thatcher. Douglas and Thatcher were the indisputable avatars for the two sides of Saskatchewan's post-war political divisions. Douglas, Cooperative Commonwealth Federation Premier from 1944 to 61, is the revered icon of prairie socialism, and Thatcher, Liberal Premier from 1964 to 71, the undisputed champion of free enterprise. Hollywood producers could not have created better theater, and this happened right in my hometown. I contacted Roy Tollefson, who had been a mover and shaker behind every history-related project in Mossbank at least since I had been in high school. Roy had headed up the committee that wrote our local history. He was one of the founders of the Mossbank and District Museum and led subsequent efforts to have the Ambrose Blacksmith Shop, which is part of the museum, successfully recognized as a provincial historic site. He was also behind a reunion of veterans of the No. 2 Bombing and Gunnery School that was part of the British Commonwealth Air Training Program near Mossbank during the war years. I knew Roy was someone who could make things happen. I explained the idea to Roy, who came on board and pulled together other local leaders. After a couple of initial meetings to discuss the idea, the Mossbank and District Historical Society was founded for the purpose of staging the debate of the century, Tommy Douglas versus Ross Thatcher, a historical reenactment of the famous 1957 debate in Mossbank. About 20 of us attended weekly meetings starting in February 2003 and continuing until the date of the reenactment set for June 28 the same year. There were to be 2 performances at the Mossbank Community Hall, which was the location of the original 1957 debate. It was agreed that the entire event would be self-funded through ticket sales and advertising. We would not seek government grants, none of which would likely have been available in any event. The Historical Society agreed that I would be responsible for the staging of the reenactments. This included providing a script, recruiting, hiring, and preparing actors, costumes, decorations, promoting the event outside of the Mossbank area, developing a brochure form, a poster, and a print program, and selling advertisements for the program. The Historical Society was responsible for all logistics, including ticket sales, the venue, a meal function, daycare, children's programming, and a program of other activities to give visitors interesting things to do while in Mossbank. This included historic tours of the Commonwealth Air Training Base in nearby Old Wives Lake, as well as museum and town tours and readings from local authors. I developed the script from the recordings of the original debate, produced by CBC Radio and kept in the provincial archives. The script was therefore verbatim what Douglas and Thatcher said, but equally important was what hecklers shouted as well as the general demeanor of the crowd, which to say the least was rowdy. The subject of the debate was the relative success or failure of Saskatchewan's crown corporations, and although the script was verbatim, I did cut some lines to keep the reenactment within the attention span of contemporary audiences. The debate consisted of a 40-minute address by Douglas, followed by a 50-minute address by Thatcher, and concluded with a 10-minute rebuttal from Douglas. Thatcher's remarks included his rebuttal time. It was really 3 speeches, and there was none of the quick back and forth one sees in most debates today. Although Douglas and Thatcher's speeches were the main event, what really livened up the event was the crowd reaction. The 1957 audience was more or less evenly divided between Thatcher and Douglas supporters who would, depending on who was speaking, shout out insults or words of encouragement and support. Various lines from each speaker would elicit applause or boos. The role of the original crowd was crucial to understanding the debate and making the audience feel like they were part of the event. The participatory element was what made the debate interesting. And to capture that aspect, local volunteers were recruited to play Liberal or CCF partisans for our production. These individuals were given specific lines to shout out at certain times as indicated by the original broadcast, and were also asked to spread themselves out throughout the audience and encourage audience members to heckle, cheer, and boo according to their own political inclinations, or if they didn't have any, then just for fun. In addition, local volunteers also played some of the other prominent individuals who attended the debate. This included Hazen Argue, Thatcher's CCF opponent in the 1957 federal election, Dr. Fred Wigmore, who chaired the debate, and Thatcher's son Colin. Alan Engel, a former New Democratic Party member of the Legislative Assembly for Assiniboia-Gravelbourg, played a CCF partisan, and another past Assiniboia-Gravelbourg MLA, Liberal Roy Nelson, attended the debate as a participant and sat in the front row, mercilessly heckling the Douglas actor. Casting the right actors to play Douglas and Thatcher was crucial. I reached out to Cal Abrahamson with Regina Little Theatre, who had also in the day been a prominent Liberal who had personally known Ross Thatcher. He immediately identified Regina actor Kelly Munce, who was an inspired choice. Kelly was the same age as Thatcher was in 1957 and was a similar build, too. Once he put on Thatcher's familiar black-framed glasses, the resemblance was uncanny. Kelly accepted the role and studied Thatcher's speech patterns from the debate recordings and soon looked and sounded the part. Kelly's recreation of Thatcher was so spot on that several people who attended the reenactments and who had known the Liberal Premier personally complimented Kelly on his portrayal. One attendee, Bob Ferguson, who had attended the original debate, stated, "I thought the guy who played Thatcher was great. It was very accurate. I used to drink beer with Thatcher at the Cecil Hotel. At the debate, we were standing in the back. There was this little old lady next to us who said, 'That's a goddamn lie,' every time Thatcher spoke. It was quite electric and fun to be at." Douglas proved more challenging to cast. 2 Moose Jaw drama teachers who were part of the community theater there suggested 19-year-old Will Barber, who was working as an actor in the tunnels of Moose Jaw. Although he was much younger than Douglas was in 1957, his build, hair, and his general features were like Douglas. When he accepted the role, he even shaved the top of his forehead to give the impression of a receding hairline, and like Kelly, he studied the recordings of the original debate. Ironically, before accepting the role, he hadn't even heard of Tommy Douglas. The question of whether an audience in which we expected at least half the people to be ardent Douglas fans would accept someone so young as Douglas was always in the back of our minds, but when Will spoke, he sounded so much like the Prairie Socialist, you could tell that his lack of wrinkles clearly didn't matter to the audience. Happy Hantelman, a longtime Mossbank resident and business person who had taken care of a lot of the local logistics at the original debate, said that Will was as close as you could get to the real Douglas. With the details in place, it was time to get down to selling some tickets. We knew we couldn't attract provincial media to a promotional event in Mossbank, which is 2 hours from Regina, so we held our promotional event in Regina. It took the form of a sneak peek of the actors portraying Douglas and Thatcher on May 8, 2003 in the Saskatchewan Gallery at the Legislature, where portraits of past premiers are displayed. Journalists are mostly history and political junkies, and every media company in the province has someone assigned to the Legislature. It was like bringing honey to the bear. Our gambit worked perfectly. Our actors gave short performances before an audience of around 100 people who were mainly journalists, politicians, and civil servants. Premier Lorne Calvert and Battleford's Liberal MLA Jack Hilson both stopped by at separate times to wish us well before we started. The Leader Post covered our event and featured a story with a picture of our actors that clearly portrayed the epic nature of the event. Perhaps even more helpful was that Leader Post columnist Murray Mandrick made the reenactments the subject of his syndicated column that appeared in many Saskatchewan local newspapers. All Regina television stations and several radio stations interviewed our actors, and we made the supper and evening newscasts. Coverage from Regina media led to interest from media in other markets as well, especially in nearby Moose Jaw. We stressed to potential audiences that this was a nonpartisan event. We avoided any comment about who won the debate and always insisted it would be up to the audience to decide. We wanted everyone possible to attend and did not want to alienate anyone because of their political philosophy. That we were successful in this regard is demonstrated by the fact that the reenactments attracted politicians and former politicians of all stripes. Besides former opponents Alan Engel and Roy Nelson, the Wood River MLA at the time from the Saskatchewan Party, Yogi Hugeberg, and the Palliser Member of Parliament at the time from the NDP, Dick Proctor, as well as provincial NDP Cabinet Minister Deb Higgins, all attended one of the reenactments. Rick Swenson, then leader of the Progressive Conservative Party, and former Deputy Premier in the Devine government, also attended, as did people who had at various times in their lives been involved in Liberal, CCF NDP, and Conservative parties. One of the most interesting elements of staging an event like these reenactments is speaking with people who attended the original event or who knew the people involved. I received a phone call from one older man who asked me to explain the event. After I did, he said very firmly, as if he expected me to argue with him, that I will be there and when Ross enters, I'm going to stand up and I am wearing my red tie and I don't care what my wife says about it. Once a woman was introduced to me because she said her family would often travel around to see Douglas when he spoke and that she had been at the original debate. She told me that at the debate she had gotten into an argument with Colin Thatcher and that she had beaten him up and he went crying to his father saying, "Daddy, Daddy, she's hurting me." I asked how old she was at the time and she replied that she had been 8. I pointed out that Colin Thatcher was 17 in 1957 and before I could say anything else she angrily told me no he wasn't and abruptly left. I guess everyone has their own version of history. Colin Thatcher himself even had an opinion on how he figured into the reenactments. An anecdote about his role was recounted in Dale Eisler's biography of his father, called Rumours of Glory. Eisler recounted that Colin Thatcher spoke with Fred Wigmore about security, and we incorporated the incident into the reenactment as a kind of prelude. Jerry McKechnie, a young Mossbank man, played Colin Thatcher, and he took the role seriously. He called Colin Thatcher, who was in prison for first-degree murder at the time, to ask him what he was wearing the night of the debate. Colin Thatcher not only returned his call, but provided Jerry with his take on the incident, saying he would never have spoken to Wigmore, an elder and authority figure, in as casual a way as portrayed by Eisler. By June 28, we had sold out both performances. We even went a bit over capacity in the first show because some people from outside Mossbank made lengthy trips to get there, assuming they'd be able to buy tickets at the door. Not wanting to turn anyone away, we found ways to squeeze them in. The reenactments had attracted sizable contingents from Regina and Moose Jaw, and evaluation forms that were distributed to participants, and which were overwhelmingly positive, indicated that people from Calgary, Saskatoon, and a wide assortment of smaller communities across the province were also in attendance. What this meant was that a large portion of the several thousands of dollars of our profits that went to support maintenance and improvements to the Mossbank Community Hall came from outside of the Mossbank community. We had brought new money into the community. I'm no economist, but that is my understanding of the purpose of tourism. The reenactments had also considerably raised Mossbank's profile. Along with significant provincial coverage, surprisingly, the reenactments even put Mossbank into Time magazine. Penny Yeager, a writer working for Time on a cover story about the decline of rural communities in Canada, attended the reenactments, hoping to find some reason for optimism. Although she was unable to convince her editors to change the focus of the section on Mossbank from the very negative messaging about rural communities in the overall story, it did lead to Mossbank being highlighted and the reenactments being cited as at least one reason for some hope. Sherilyn Jolly-Nagel, one of the members of the Historical Society, summed up local reaction to the success when she said, "We didn't know if 2 people would show, but this exceeded our expectations. It's been a real ego boost for the town." We did all that in less than 6 months and without one dime from a government grant. The Mossbank debate reenactments turned out to be the tip of a wave of Tommy Douglas-related projects in the next few years. Douglas won the Greatest Canadian Contest in 2004. A one-man play, Tommy Douglas and the Arrows of Desire, written and performed by the redoubtable John Nolan, toured the province throughout 2004-2005. And finally, Prairie Giant, the 2-part CBC movie produced by Regina's Mind's Eye Pictures, was released in 2006. Suddenly, there was a lot of Tommy Douglas everywhere, although it was the good people of Mossbank who led the way, although in fairness to John Nolan, he had been working on his impressive play a lot longer than we had on these reenactments. My hopes that the success of this reenactment would attract the attention of Centennial organizers didn't materialize, but I didn't give up on the idea of community events built around historical reenactments. This led me to reenact another debate in 2008 around the debate between James Gardner and the leader of the Ku Klux Klan, which we'll look at in the second part of this feature.